Well, hello and welcome back to Craig's Workshop. This is episode 5 of the Stefan Goddess Winter indicator holder build. In this episode we take these two pieces of 12mm chromoly that we prepped in episode 1 and we turn them into these two square pieces. Step 1 will be to chuck these up in the 4-jaw and indicate them in. Step 2 will be to neck down this 6mm area and the tapered shoulder. This 10mm area for the threading. We'll put some relief in as a lead out for the threads. We'll turn this smaller shoulder here and maybe turn a lead in for the threads. We'll make the threads. We'll take it back to the mill. We'll drill these holes indicating from the end and the two faces. We'll bore this taper using a centre drill. We'll put it on the rotary table and we'll put it on some kind of central pin and clamp it at the outboard end. Now these are 20mm over long, that's not a mistake, that gives us some square stock out here to hold on to. You can easily machine yourself into a corner with this kind of thing. So we'll clamp down here, have a pin for registration here, mill this outside diameter, this semi-circle. We'll leave a bit of oversized material just for hand finishing. And then we'll hold that waste piece in the 4-jaw back on the lathe and part off, leaving the waste in the chuck, and the good part falls off in both cases. Now there's a dovetail to mill in the end of this piece, and I've come up with 2 or 3 ways that could be done. One is to take a triangular file and grind one of the faces so that it becomes a safe edge. So you start with a rectangular slot here and put the safe edge on that base edge and file sideways until you reach a good fit. Another option is to do what I call the Harold Hall method, which is to use an end mill, as you can see I've drawn here, have the workpiece canted at 30 degrees, use an end mill and overcut these corners but leave a land in the middle, so it doesn't form a true dovetail, but the faces that matter will be right. So that's another option. And a third option is to use the lathe kind of like an oversized tool and cutter grinder. I could have a tool in the chuck of the lathe and a Dremel set up as a tool post grinder to grind the 60-degree cutting face and end that we need, or the overall profile, and then by hand grind that truncated cone into some cutting faces and some relief, and add some relief. So I don't know whether that's going to be the way I go, but we've got 2 or 3 options there. We'll think about all that at the end, but for now I want to get these shoulders and neck pieces done, and the reliefs and the threads and these holes and the radiuses. So over to the lathe. Okay, well that's the main bit of turning done. These are down to 6mm and an M10 by 1.25 thread with an 8.5 lead in. I probably haven't finished these threads, I've just done them by the numbers. Obviously I can't test fit with this square stock on the end. I do have a die, so it'll just make life easier on the die if I single point 90% of it away. So next up is to poke some holes and some tapered bores into the end of here to suit the tapers on here. It's 60 degrees, so I'll just use a centre drill to get that. And if you're pretty eagle-eyed, you'll realise I've just taken about 1mm off the end of this one, just so that these radiuses appear in the same place. Right, well I've got the workpiece set up in the vise. Now would be a really good time to have a vise stop, a decent vise stop. I've got one for the little vise, but I haven't got any hold down clamps for the little vise on this table yet. So I'm just going to zero up on the edges and the ends. I've got 0, 0 stored as the centre of this rotary table, and I know I'm going to go back to that in half an hour, so I've left that as my absolute 0, 0. I've just hit the abs/ink button on the DRO, which gives me basically a fresh set of coordinates. I'm in incremental mode now, and I can zero that wherever I want, and any time I can go back to abs, just 0, 0, and I'm up to here, back on the centre of the rotary table. So I'll only need to reset my X once I put the other workpiece in. Later on I'll just edge find off the end, move over a little bit, 0, so it'll be fine. Perhaps I'm going to do up the collar. I've got a centre drill in here now. The tip of that is about 5.02, so it may take a tiny cut on the top part of that bore, top part of that hole. It's not going to be a problem because it's located by the taper anyway. So we'll give that a go now. Alright, that's the first cone section done, and I don't have a fantastic way of measuring it, but that caliper's set to 10 and locked off, and yeah, I think that's going to be close enough. I'll do the other one off camera, it'll be exactly the same. Well, what we've got here is a couple of little bits and bobs I've just made up. These need rounding off on the end, so I need to be able to put them on the rotary table, and I think the smartest way of doing that, I mean I could probably put them in a small vise and have a bit of a machinist jack under here and sort of hang them out the side, but probably the simplest and easiest way is I made a little Morse 2 plug that you just bop down into there. That fits reasonably well. That's a 5mm pin, no play on there, and just so that the end mill has somewhere to go when it cuts through the workpiece, all I've done is just put a flat plate of aluminium there, just gives me something to work on so I don't chew up my table. So I'll clamp this off and I'll get the end mill and collet set up and bring you back in a minute. Okay, I've got this clamped down, everything's centred up. I'm using a 4-flute HSS 8mm end mill. I will run it at about 1000 RPM to start with and see how we go. Yeah, I'm much happier with that. I don't have any dig-ins this time, and I don't have any arises left over. So that method, that work holding method, works better than the last one I used when I rounded the ends of the arm. So this is a good method, I like that. I'll do the other one off camera because it's exactly the same. Right, well here's the results of the milling we just did. We've got this radius in place on the ends. The finish is quite nice. You can see I've just gone slightly deep on one side here and slightly shallow on the other. It's a similar situation to what I had with the arm, and I think what it means is this hole, which I used as my registration, is just a tiny amount off center in that direction. It makes no difference to anything because I'll dress that by hand, and I'll probably polish these parts as well. I just wanted to show you what it was like straight off the mill. So that one though is tangent on both sides. Very nice. Happy with that. So I'll dress this up with the smooth file, which would take 2 or 3 minutes max, and then I'll chuck them up in the lathe on this end and we'll part them off to size. Well, I gave these a little bit of a buff on the wheel. It's quite tempting to overdo it. I mean, these are not perfect, but it's very easy to round the corners over with a buffing wheel. So, and these are going to get banged up in use, dinged and scratched and knocked around. I mean, I hope they're not going to get knocked around. It's a delicate instrument, but you know, some bumps and scrapes are inevitable, and none of this is hardened, and the brass is as soft as butter. So. And it will tarnish as well, but it'll look good on day one. So we're now pretty close. I've got to chuck these two up in the lathe in the four-jaw and part off the good bits to length. I'm probably going to end up having to run a threading die up the threads, as I said before, just to make it fit the nut. A couple of washers, dovetail, and that'll be a finished job then. I think I'm going to call it a day there and upload this video, but yeah, I don't think there's going to be too much more to do. Washers, dovetail, and chase those threads. Maybe a bit more finishing as well, but we're getting there.